on my husband, and he spared no mercy in ruining my life. When I say he had spared no expense in ruining me, I mean it to the truth. My husband didn't even think twice about how this would tell on him or report on our family situation. It was like I had ceased to exist to him once he found out about my cheating mistake. I became nothing to him, and he proceeded to treat me like what I was. For someone that had been married to him for over 7 years, he had sure treated me like a stranger. This was something that could have been solved with therapy and the likes. I mean, we had been in love once upon a time and had been married. Don't you think with this, he should have at least tried to find out what had propelled me to have an affair outside our marriage? At least he owed that to me. I know you all will be sold on decorum on this platform, talk about I owed it to him not to cheat and whatnot, but I'm on here to vent about my husband. Or rather, my ex-husband. He had wiped off my entire savings and taken the house he had gifted me on the day we had gotten married. The darn man hadn't stopped there. He had stripped me of all rights to have access to my son. Who cuts off all access of a mother to her son? My ex-husband, that's who. I had cheated, so what? We should have tried to fix it. I was ready to. I mean, who wakes up and decides to just cheat on their spouse? No one. There had to be a changing factor. And in my case, there had been. There had been a lot. I didn't just wake up one morning and decide to cheat on my husband of 7 years. There had been temptation, and from there several cobwebs, which I would get into definitely. So you all would get to understand it hadn't been totally my fault that I had an affair outside my marriage. Not that I'm seeking anyone's validation on this platform. My life has already been ruined. Ruined terribly, for that matter. You know, I keep on going to sleep and waking up and thinking this would all be a dream. That somehow I had vexed the god of nightmares and not my husband, and he had kept me in this endless loop of nightmares. I had nothing to my name because I had cheated. That was a terrible wake-up call, in my opinion. Retelling this experience just seemed to have a worse effect, by the way. An effect that is now my life because I had fallen for temptation. An effect I was now living because my husband decided to throw me and our darn long marriage to the wind. But in truth, it had all been my fault, no matter how hard I tried to delude myself. I had made the mistakes, more of, and I couldn't fault him for being done with me. I could have told him from the beginning and avoided this whole nightmare. I was a total blob and everything still felt surreal. Well, I'm beginning to get carried away with writing down my thoughts on the matter, without telling y'all how everything had come to play, and how my husband ruined my life. Like I said, the premier cause of the problem had been temptations, which led to a whole lot of cobwebs. These temptations came on as a result of problems my marriage had immediately when we marked our 7th wedding anniversary. Well, that most definitely had been a night to remember. It was the night my husband's ex-wife, first love, decided to waltz back into our lives. Like, you wouldn't believe the power of this woman. She just strolled in, and my husband began panting after her like a thirsty puppy. It was demeaning and downright downgrading, for crying out loud. 7 years, I had been married to this man for 7 years, and one look at his ex-wife, I began to feel small and had my doubts. Then, the downslide of problems began. You see, when I explained to y'all on here that it hadn't truly been my fault, I wasn't lying. After my husband's ex-wife showed, and yes, I knew he had been married before, and no, I didn't know what had caused them to separate. My husband never really talked about his ex-wife or his previous marriage, and he had been taking care of me, so of course I wasn't going to ask. Things went from good to terrible since she showed her face at the party. My husband began staying at the house less, always claiming one work trip or the other lol. There was no way he wasn't distancing himself from me. I thought to myself he had to be cheating on me with her. Wasn't it obvious? But I couldn't do anything about it because, unlike the independent women of today, I had been a housewife who had popped out a son and hosted parties for my husband and his friends. No, I wasn't living in a fairy tale, and I know this will sound too good to be true, but it was my life. My parties became her parties. She took ultimate control of the house. And do you guys want to know what my husband did when I confronted him about his little mistress? Nothing. My husband did absolutely nothing. Heck, if I hadn't spoken up, she would have started living with us. He then began arguing with me over every single thing. Obviously, we argued on occasion. There was no married couple that didn't. But ever since the little witch showed up, it was like I was in an invisible competition with her, and hence the arguing with my husband. What would he prefer to have for dinner? Argue. Was he going on a trip by the weekend? Argue. It became a strain to talk to him, so one day I exploded up on him. I told him exactly what I thought of him and his little witch, and how I knew he was probably cheating on me with her. Because what other reason could she have been back into our lives for? Redditors, you needed to have seen the way my husband combusted on me. It was like I had set off the fireworks and the comparisons began. At the end of the fight, my husband told me if I wasn't satisfied with the way he was treating me with all the money and the houses and the luxury gifts, I shouldn't let the door hit me on the way out. My husband of 7 years, someone I had fallen in love with against all advice, had said that to me. I had literally gone against all warnings because of love and married him. And since I had no one he thought he could say to me. Let me give you all a little introduction on how my husband and I met. My name is Laurel, and I'm 33 years old. My husband's name is Mark, and he's 40 years old. My husband, or should I say my ex-husband? Well, I'll call him my husband till I get to the part of our divorce. My husband owned a law firm, a successful one at that, and I had met him when I had been posted there for my internship. No, I didn't study law. I had studied international relations, but my mother had wanted me to study law, so she dumped me in a law firm as punishment. You know how mothers can be. I wasn't even where the real stuff happened. I had been stuck with the solicitors back then, but I remember I met my husband when he had thrown a workers' retreat. I had badmouthed him in front of everyone, not knowing he was the owner of the law firm, and as a way to make it up to him, I became his coffee fetcher. Cliché, right? Same thing my friends had said. We had started dating a year later after my internship had ended. Luckily, I wasn't employed in the company once I was done with college, unless it would have been an office scandal. As it then, I hadn't known my husband had been married before. I got to find out with the whole of my family when he took us out for dinner and we bumped into her in a restaurant. I mean, how small could the whole of Connecticut be that we had to have ran into her there? The tension at the restaurant that evening had been so thick that even a chainsaw couldn't cut it. Apparently, as I had come to learn, they had only been married for a year and had split for reasons my husband hadn't deemed fit to tell me about. The reasons had to have been something serious because there had been a lot of side eyes and unbridled words. Once my folks had found out that he had been married before, they were strictly against the marriage. In their words, if he couldn't take care of his former wife, then he couldn't take care of me, and I was better off finding someone closer to my age. And I hadn't taken their word of warning. My parents had me cut off because I went ahead with the relationship. After a year of dating, my husband proposed, and true to their words, my parents hadn't shown up for my wedding. I could still remember the shock of not seeing them at my wedding. I had sent them invitations and had kept my fingers crossed for a miracle. But I walked down the aisle by myself with only my friends from college to clap for me. I had done all that because I had loved him. I had gone against my parents' wishes to marry this man, and after 7 years here, he was calmly telling me I could use the door if I didn't like that his ex-wife was back in his life. Can you imagine the dimwit? Why wouldn't I have cheated back? Well, I didn't leave, of course. I didn't leave because he was right. He provided for me the money, the luxury, and the gifts. I couldn't leave him, and I couldn't have left my son either, so I had stayed put. I was frustrated and desperately needed someone to talk to. So when that person came by, I took the opportunity, not knowing I was setting up a landslide for myself. My husband's partner in his law firm, Gary. At first, it was just a simple case of him asking how I was doing and if there was anything he could do to assist me. He had been so kind, so I found myself drifting more and more to him as my husband drifted away from me. My husband could be gone for more than 2 weeks on a business trip. I had wondered what kind of case could make a lawyer be gone for almost a month. I mean, he always had his cases at home base. But ever since the witch had magically appeared, my husband disappeared on various occasions. Funny occasions. And as a woman, I had needs. I needed someone to talk to. My son was barely 4 and still speaking in toddler talk. Like I had said, I hardly had any friends. My husband had been all I had. And a girl had needs, which was then coupled with the loneliness of hardly seeing my husband. The few occasions he came back, it was like I had become invisible. He preferred sleeping in one of the guest rooms rather than to be near my space. He was out like the speed of lightning before daylight cracks, and only came back when it was past midnight. The signs had just been too numerous for me not to jump into conclusions, but instead of calling him out again and have him throw me out for good this time, I turned to his friend, who seemed to be always there to listen. I turned to his friend the first time out of curiosity because I wanted to know what my husband's ex-wife had over my husband. I wanted to know the spell the witch had over my husband. So I had gone and asked my husband's best friend and partner. This was when I found out that my husband's ex-wife was also a partner in their law firm. So it was the three of them that ran the firm. No wonder she had such control over him. He needed her, but where had she been for the past 7 years? Why the heck did she think she could waltz in and try to test my marriage? And that foolish man I had married didn't want to do anything about it. This was where my husband's friend stepped in, and I'm sure you all can guess the rest. It started with simple trips to his house to get advice on what I should do about my husband and why I was suddenly invisible to him. Then it progressed to me talking about everything and anything with him and cooking for him. From there, that's how I landed in between the sheets with him. Yep, that's how I started sleeping with my husband's best friend and partner. Like I said earlier, I can't be fully blamed for it. I wasn't getting any attention from my husband's end, and I found where to get the attention. And my willpower crumpled like a crushed flower. Right under my nose, the thing with my husband's best friend and partner turned into an affair, and I couldn't stop. I didn't want to, quite frankly. While my husband was busy going on trips with his ex-wife or whomever, I was warming his best friend's bed with my son in daycare. Life was perfect for me. For a while, I thought I had everything panned out. My husband would never find out, and I could end this thing with his best friend when I wanted to. I was wrong on both counts. Totally wrong. My husband found out. I wondered how it had been like when he found out. His best friend had been the one to break the news to him when I couldn't succumb to his blackmail. Yes, my husband's best friend blackmailed me. I told you all it would only get worse from the moment I decided to cheat on my husband. This was how my perfect life with my affair took a turn. A month after hiding and enjoying an affair with my husband's best friend behind his back, my husband came back and started liking my company again. He even sought me out on all occasions, and the problem with his ex-wife wasn't a problem anymore. It was as if there was a transformation on the last trip he had traveled for, and I began feeling guilty. I had my family back again. I couldn't continue having an affair outside my marriage. It wouldn't bode well for me. So I decided to end the affair. In my head, I had thought it was going to be as simple as just saying it. It had been a phase, and I needed to end it. It was meant to be as simple as that. I had never been more wrong in my life. The man I had once found comfort in turned out to be a nightmare. Literally, you all. He had recorded pictures of our affair that was supposed to be hidden behind closed doors. And when I had gone to end the affair, he had thrown said pictures in my face and told me he was ready to lose the friendship with my husband, but in his own words, was I ready to lose my marriage with my husband? The car that was my life now started its journey downward on the slope of disasters. Yes, this was how my husband's best friend began blackmailing me. It started with little things like a copy of deeds, which I had no idea what he needed to use that for. I mean, I could sacrifice a couple of papers over me losing my marriage. Even though I wasn't in it for love anymore, I wouldn't even have nowhere to start to cater for myself and my child if my husband kicked me out. I didn't know how soon my fear would come to pass. From a couple of papers to keys to some drawers, the tasks to buy my husband's best friend's silence over our affair became harder by the day. The evil man wanted the firm for himself. That's what I had found out, and I couldn't keep giving him easy access to all the hard work and sweat my husband had put in to raise his company. That's when my husband's best friend became my nightmare. The threats tripled from just telling my husband about our affair, but forwarding it to their clients to diminish my husband's reputation to making threats on my son. I had to give him what he wanted. The fear of losing my marriage had conquered all the fear of my husband losing the ownership rights of his firm. Once again, I had never been so wrong and foolish in my life. I made another foolish mistake. I handed him another important document. How had I known I had made a foolish mistake? It came to slap me back in the face when my husband came back from work one day and threw papers of my affair right in my face. Like, how had I been so foolish to not see that coming? I had trusted the devil. I had trusted him to hide a lie when he was the father of lies. The time after my husband threw the pictures in my face had been a blur because he hadn't confronted me yet. He had just left me in the house and hadn't come home not even once. I hadn't known what had been happening in his head or what he was planning to do to me. I just had this dreadful feeling in my head that I was definitely done for, so I decided to start planning how I would sell most of the things he had gotten for me. My eyes had been on the condo he had gotten for me when I had given birth to my son. I could sell that and use the money to move to another city and start a new life for me and my son. I didn't know my husband's plans were going to disrupt mine totally. The fruition of my husband's plans began when he stumbled angrily into the house one evening and flung divorce papers in my face and carried my son out of the house. You remember that downward slope I had said my car, which was my life, was on? Yeah, at this point it had crashed and was tumbling in a non-stop motion. The thing I had feared the most was laughing me in the face while dancing the mamba around me. I deserved it, you all don't need to tell me, but I still had a plan. That's what I had thought. When I went to sell the house, my husband had gotten me to be able to run away once I signed the papers. I was told the house wasn't under my name. I had shown the realtor the deeds in my name, and I was told that wasn't the correct documents to the house. That the document in my hand only showed I had purchased a space in a storage unit. You can't even begin to imagine how stupid I had felt at that moment. I had been played by my husband. Like, why would he lie to me about a house if he hadn't bought me one? It had all been in the plan to ruin my life. I hadn't known then. In my head, it was just a cruel taste of fate. After the property fiasco, I had to pawn off my rings and bracelets my husband had gotten me as a show of love. I put that in quotes because after giving me a fake property for giving birth to his son, I don't think my husband understood the meaning of love. Well, I was in the middle of looking for jewelry to sell when I remembered that he had opened up a bank account for me that he had said he would be for me. I had that as my last resort because I hadn't been saving much in our marriage. He provided everything I wanted, so I hadn't seen the need to save. I regret that now. Well, I shouldn't have put much hope in the account because just like the fake property, the account was empty. Can you imagine the gall of this man? After staying with him for 7 years, he was treating me like this because I had a little affair. It wasn't even as if he was innocent in retrospect. So I went to confront him because I wasn't going to go out of this marriage office without anything. I found him at his office, and of course, the witch that had started this whole problem was there with him. And I told her explicitly what I thought of her. That she was a marriage wrecker who, instead of respecting her old age, was behaving like a prostitute and panting after a married man. Well, that didn't bode well for me because my husband threw me out of his office when I hadn't even delivered the message I had come to say to him. It didn't stop me, though. I came again the next day and the day after until I became a nuisance in his workplace, and he had no choice but to give me an audience. Then I told him everything I thought of him and his cheap two-timing behind, and my husband told me what he thought of me. Apparently the house had been real, but he had switched the papers and bought the house for himself since he had a 1/3 commanding interest in the house. And my savings, he had cleared that because he also owned the account. That day my husband swore he was going to wreck my life like I had wrecked his. It was on this day that I found out that my husband was fighting for ownership of his firm with his best friend in court. I had contributed to the problem. I signed the divorce papers on that day in shame, with the hope that at least he would forgive me, and I could start from scratch again. I knew there was no way I was going to get custody of my son. I didn't even want to try. Do you guys think I did the right thing? Update 2, Hi Redditors. I'm back with an update on what happened with my life after I divorced my husband. Apparently my husband wasn't done with me. Nope, I wasn't nowhere done paying for my sins with my husband and his best friend. After I had divorced my husband and receded all rights of custody of my son, I had tried to pick up my life, but of course that had been hard without a dime to my name. My parents had decided to cut me off ever since I had married my ex-husband, and even as I became free from the marriage, they still wanted nothing to do with me. Well, my friends were a close-knit bunch that agreed with what my parents said, so I didn't have any help from them. I had to go back to being a barista. I began living from hand to mouth. I had nowhere to stay. You'll think with all these terrible things happening to me, I would have learnt my lesson. No, I hadn't. 6 months after I had divorced my husband and 6 months of working like an elephant and eating like an ant, someone walked into the cafe where I was working. Your first guess would surely be my ex-husband's best friend. But no, that wasn't who graced my cafe with their presence. It was my ex-husband's ex-wife. According to her, she had been watching me for some time and was saddened by how things were going horrible for me. Yeah, the witch just came to laugh in my face. She said she had a job for me and asked if I had any qualms with working with my ex-husband again. I was about to say no. There was no way I was going to be working with my ex-husband again. Then I heard the salary amount for the job, and I was humbled. That was 5 times my monthly income as a barista in just 1 month. I didn't waste any time in accepting not knowing I was setting myself up for another run. Well, I found out the hard way. I began working for my ex-husband's ex-wife as her personal assistant. Who would have thought I would be this deeply involved in drama after the one I just got out from? I'm sure you guys didn't see this coming. It was like I was living a dream. Scratch that, I was living in a nightmare. Like, has anyone ever experienced this level of drama in their lives, or am I the only one that's always singled out for bad things? There was no way the life I was living was normal or real or true in any way. No matter how hard I wished it was a dream, this was my reality. During the beginning weeks, things hadn't been weird at all. I didn't even get to see my ex-husband, but things began to get weird and suspicious, and I was in the middle of it once more. My ex-husband's ex-wife, my boss more of, had an imitator in her office most of the time whenever I went there to submit a document she asked for. The lawyers supposed to defend the law and have a clean slate free of crime were the ones doing the most evil things. I didn't know what she'd been using the imitator for. In fact, how I had found out she had been using an imitator was when she told me to go and drop off the document I had gotten from my ex-husband's personal secretary. I had viewed the document and found that something was off about it. No one would notice except someone with a keen eye, and I had lived with my ex-husband for 7 years, so I knew exactly how he signed his signatures. I knew something was off. Yep, something was really off, and it started to unveil itself when I found my ex-husband's best friend in a meeting with my boss, his ex-wife. That's when I knew that something was going on, and it was going to be against my husband. But I couldn't do anything about it. I was an employee of his ex-wife, and he had cut me out of his life. My only hope was that my child was safe and not involved in whatever they had planned. They began to let me in on their plans, scratch that. They began to slip with their plans in front of me when my boss ordered me to make copies of a CAFO of a house. You all would never guess what just landed in my lap. My boss had just told me to go make copies of the rights to the ownership of my house. The house my husband had allegedly bought for me, but bought back for himself in his attempt to ruin me. Like, can you imagine my stroke of luck? What was she doing with it? It was none of my business, so I just did my job and made copies of the papers like she had told me to. But the feeling of holding what had rightfully been the papers to my property in my hand, after I had let it slip from my fingers, that had stung. I was sure that was what my boss had wanted to accomplish. She wanted me to know how it felt, not having something to call my own. After that incident, it seemed their plans started working for them because my ex-husband came back from his trip and began searching his whole office for important documents. I had heard that he had thrown a tantrum when he couldn't find whatever he was looking for. Apparently, he hadn't known I was now working for his ex-wife, and I didn't run into him. You want to know when things became truly suspicious and horrible for me? I mean, it was like I couldn't have a single moment of peace ever since I had cheated. Well, my husband's ex-wife came to me and gave me a large amount of cash and told me I could take 2 weeks off. In her own words, I deserved it. This was someone I just started working for a month ago. I should have known I was being set up. I had no clue until it all unfolded before my eyes. I took her money and went to rent a room and just rest from all the hassle I had been through. Yeah, then the police and my ex-husband came knocking. I had no idea how they had found out where I lived, but they barged in and started rapping in Spanish to my ears. There was talk of forgery and theft, and it was at the point they pulled the house papers with my signature on it that I knew I had been set up. Everything I said from that moment fell on deaf ears as I was whisked to the police station. I couldn't believe what was happening. This charge was going to be a dent to my name officially. When someone pulled up my records, they were going to see a criminal record. This charge was going to make it hard for me to get my son. Those had been the only thoughts in my head when the police read my rights and told me I had access to a state lawyer to defend my cause since I didn't have one. I couldn't afford one because I had been given counterfeit cash. This was another charge on my head because I wasn't supposed to be in possession of counterfeit bills. I tried. I tried so very hard to explain that I had been a pawn that had been set up. However, my ex-husband's ear was closed to my pleas. According to him, I had come back to try to take everything once again, and I could never be trusted. This was how I was whisked away to prison. Yep, folks, I was found guilty for forgery and theft and was sentenced to prison for 10 years. I wasn't going to see my son for 10 years. My life was completely and utterly ruined. And it was still ruined, but luckily I didn't get to go to prison for 10 years. How would I be here typing this update a year later if I had gone to prison? Well, my case was reviewed 2 months later when everything was uncovered that it had been my ex-husband's ex-wife and his best friend's plan to use me as a cover front for their much bigger fraud. They didn't get away with it, though. Yeah, that's how I was released. Apparently, they had made me sign the paper without my knowledge. Yes, my signature hadn't been forged. That's why the court had found me guilty in the first place. However, they just wanted my ex-husband to be focused on my case while they sold the firm to the rival firm and disappeared with the money. They also forged my ex-husband's signature to gain access to his accounts. That's when they were found. And I was released after going through the worst 2 months of my life. I had contemplated dying because it was difficult on those nights when I thought about what I would do with my life after 10 years of rotting in prison. What I had gone there is something I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy because I had seen what my eyes couldn't imagine. I'm sure you're wondering if my husband apologized to me after the whole fiasco was over. He didn't. In his own words, I had deserved everything that was happening to me. According to him, maybe sometime I would get to have some common sense to know not to trust easily. Yeah, I had learned my lesson big time. Trying to get a job with my criminal record was hard and sometimes warranted in insults from employers. I couldn't get to see my child too because my ex-husband was threatening heaven and hell if I ever came near them. So I was stuck once more, living from hand to mouth until I gained the courage to face my parents again. Lol, it didn't go well, but at least I got a roof over my head and occasional food while I figured out the next step of my life. My mom was the one pressuring me to do more than wait on people and serve them coffee. That I should do something useful with my degree, that's why they had put me through school. I get that she was trying to be helpful, and it was in her nature, but I was trying. I woke up trying and went to sleep trying. This was something that wouldn't leave my mind, even in my second lifetime. Yep, I was stuck with the memory of never getting to see my son. And nothing I could do would rewind the clock to stop me from making the horrible decision of having an affair with my husband's best friend. I hope you all have learned a thing or two from my experience in trusting people and hurting those you claim to love. I had caused my problem myself when I had cheated on my husband as an effort to curb my loneliness. It had been stupid, and I will continue facing the consequences of my actions by not getting to watch my child grow up. That's one thing I was going to miss, and it pains me to the depths of my soul. I hope one day my ex-husband gets to allow me back into my child's life. As for you folks, I hope you guys get to learn not to trust just anyone, even if it's your closest pal, because they can turn around to bring about your downfall, and family always has your back, no matter if they cut you off for eternity. They would have your back still. This doesn't mean you should ever succumb to having an affair outside your marriage. You would learn the hard way like I did. I'm still trying to pick up my life after I was left with nothing, and it's been hard every step of the way. But I'm thinking, I'll move to a new city and start life over again. Maybe see if with a new place there will be new opportunities. Well, I hope you have a good life, Redditors, and stay away from trouble. Bye. Picture a young girl with short hair and an average face growing up in an average family. My family wasn't rich, but they did their best to take care of me. I was bullied as a kid, so I was more of a loner than others. I didn't have many friends, not until my brother came along. His name is John. He was my best friend, and he still is. I was 5 years old when I held his small body in my hand. He practically followed me around everywhere. When I got into college, he didn't want me to go, and he cried. I shouldn't have gone, but I can't change anything that has happened, and I know that. Along the line, I started becoming an extrovert, and I was able to talk more with others. A lot of things have happened since then. I was also able to stand up for myself. I'm married now, and my life was going great, not until Alex, my ex-boyfriend, entered the picture. John didn't like Alex much, but I think it was a guy thing. You're probably wondering why I'm telling you all this, and you don't understand. So I'll start from the beginning. My name is Emily, and I want to tell you a story. I'm not a writer, so pardon me if there's any mistakes, but I'll make sure you'll understand what I'm telling you. This is my story, and I need everyone's help because I don't know what to do. I'll start from the beginning of my married life. I met Stan when I was 21 years old. We were both done with university, and since then, we hit it off. I gave him the cold shoulder at first. He never gave up on me, but the way he acted was different from Alex, not like I'm comparing. He's a really sweet and caring guy. We dated for a year plus, and he introduced me to his family. I loved his family, and they also loved me. It was great. Stan proposed to me, and I said yes. The marriage went smoothly. It was a very small wedding at a small church, and we invited just a few friends and family members. I didn't want something large because I hated being around crowds, and he respected that. I remember telling him the words, "I do." To be honest, I was scared of getting married because I didn't want it to hold me down, but eventually I had the courage. We've been married for a year now, and some problem came up. The first one is that I couldn't get pregnant, and I don't know why. Okay, maybe I know why, but we're trying to work on it. The doctor said I don't have enough eggs to fertilize, and I don't even know what that means. It's really upsetting because his family and also mine kept bothering me when we were going to get a baby. I don't know how to tell them that we're trying, but I know it's anytime soon. If nothing works, we have no choice but to say something. I would list the other issues as I keep writing. My husband, Stan, and I live in this 3-bedroom apartment which he bought, and I'm really proud of him. He also has this job that he's doing. I can't say where, but all I can say is that he's a lawyer. From someone who came from a very average home, I would say this is a huge job, and I can't stop bragging about it to my friends. I also have a teaching job. I teach kids in kindergarten, and I have to say that it's a really fun thing to do. I really want kids of my own, and we're still trying to figure something out. Now, picture a Wednesday evening where the sun rays are shining since it was summer. My friends came over that evening for our little book club that we do. I love reading books, and I also met others who do. There are 3 of them. There's Sarah, she's the nerdest in the group, and she's fun to be around. There's also Tracy, who is the hottest in the group, or at least the other friends say that. And the last one is Anna. She's the clown of the group because she makes everyone laugh. You can say that I'm kind of in between everything, and I love myself for that. It was my day off from work then because I was a bit of a part-time teacher. I only go to work on Mondays, Tuesdays, and Fridays, so Wednesday and Thursdays were my day off during the weekdays. Stan was at work that day, and I was having fun with my friends. We discussed a lot of things. It was already late, so they told me bye, and I escorted them out. I heard my phone vibrate, and I thought, who would be calling me right now? I didn't hear it vibrate anymore, so I figured out it was a text. I don't receive texts except for my mail concerning a work-related thing, so this was surprising. When I checked it, it was from an unknown number. I was very curious now. I opened the message and I was shocked. The message was from Alex, my ex, who I hadn't heard from in more than a year. He didn't even come to my wedding, not like I was expecting him to. I knew this was him because the text he sent was, "Hey Em, it's Alex. I don't know if you still remember me, but hit me up if you do." You might be thinking, I know many Alex. Or maybe you're not, but the point is that he's the only one that calls me Em. I was wondering how he got my number, considering I didn't think he'd have it with him. And before I could even think of texting him then, my phone crashed. There's another story for that. I met Alex when I was in college. I was a freshman and he was a sophomore. He was this proud person who I didn't like at first. He assumed everyone was in love with him because he was this handsome guy, and I didn't like it because he was right. And most of my friends had a crush on him and pushed themselves on him. I tried my best to ignore him every time, but for unknown reasons, he kept trying to come closer to me. I noticed this at first, but I tried to ignore it. Perhaps I was just overthinking it. I figured it out when he came to me in person trying to start a conversation with me, but I only walked away. I didn't want attention to myself, and I intended to be very low-key, but he was trying to make things worse for me. He came again to me, and I spoke my mind to him. I asked him why he was trying to talk to him when clearly there were other girls that wanted him, and he only scoffed. He talked about how he didn't care about others, and he's been watching me from afar. I laughed because that was creepy, but I still didn't believe him. He tried getting closer to me every time, by talking to me, walking with me, and even telling everyone that I was his very good friend. Each day, it looked like the girls around hated me while my friends showed that they were jealous. A month had passed and Alex asked me out. I turned him down at first, and he never gave up. He told me he liked me and wanted to date me. I didn't believe him because boys weren't trustworthy, especially not in college. Yet Alex didn't give up, and he kept trying to go out with me, but I said no. There was a day where I finally said yes and agreed to go out with me. He looked so excited about it, and that made me smile too. I asked him where we would be going, and he said he was going to come pick me up at home. He knew where I lived since he walked home with me sometimes. I told my mom and dad about the date, and they smiled. I was 18 then, so they said they would let me go on the date with him. I did everything to look extra pretty for him. I didn't completely like him, but maybe I did feel something for him. He came over and he was amazed when he saw my short hair let down even when I usually packed it up in school. His eyes also scanned my blue dress that I wore. I hoped it wasn't too much. I scanned him too and thought he looked really good with the black suit he wore. At first I hoped my dressing wasn't too much. Now I was thinking I didn't dress well. He greeted my parents and they investigated him before they let us go. We laughed at that because his voice was shaky throughout. I apologized to him for the pressure they were putting on him. John was also around, but he just glared at him, and it was funny because it made Alex uncomfortable. We went to his car, and he opened the door for me just like a gentleman. I was honestly delighted by that. He also complimented me, which took me aback. He had given me compliments, but not as sincere as this. Alex took me to a fancy restaurant, which was my first time there, coming from an average family. I thought dates were burgers or pizza places. That night, Alex and I discussed a lot of things. I found out things about him. He told me he was an artist, and I was amazed. No one knew about that except one close friend that he trusted them not to tell anyone. The fact that Alex had a hobby like that was what surprised me more. We ordered some food, and even the food was fancy and tasted good. I asked Alex to show me his art, and he brought out his phone and showed me some that he snapped. I remember one which was a little girl holding a flower, and it was something I'd never seen before. It was a unique drawing, and he had talent. I also told him things about me, about my family, and where I come from. I asked him when he started liking me, and he said, "It just happened." My first kiss was with him, and it was a blissful memory. The night was over before we knew it. I hated how the night ended so quickly because I wanted to spend more time with him. He took me home and I told him bye. The next day was almost the same as every day, except this time I accepted Alex and everyone knew we were dating. This went on for almost a year before things changed. He told me he wanted to talk to me. I was scared because of the tone with which he said. I was thinking if he was fed up with me and wanted to break up. I wouldn't be surprised if it was that. But what he told me was different. He said he was going to travel out of the country to pursue his studies in art. That was a great thing to me because I remember asking him if he had any plans since he was great at it. I knew there was something more with the way he looked at me, and I feared that I knew what it was. He told me he had to break up because he couldn't have a long-distance relationship. I remember begging him not to, that we could work on it. I also remember telling him that I liked him so much and I wanted to have something with him, but he kept turning me down and said he couldn't work out. We maintained distance then, and I was pissed. I was angry at him, but more at myself because I wanted someone and the person didn't. He tried talking to me sometimes, but I didn't want to hear anything from him. He left the country some days after, and he didn't even say goodbye. I was pissed because he had my number and he couldn't call. I also had his number, but I couldn't give up my pride to text or call first. Around that time, my phone got damaged and I lost all the contacts. I didn't think I'd be hearing from Alex. Well, at least, not until now. I was still looking at the message and contemplating whether I should reply back or not. I did what my instincts said, and I replied to him. I was hesitant and walked around wondering if he would text back. I was thinking maybe he texted me by mistake, and my silly mind replied to him, and it was probably a joke. My phone vibrated after a few minutes, and I immediately checked it. His message read, "Hey, it's been long. I know it's weird that I was expecting his text, but it didn't mean anything. I just felt glad that I meant something to him and he still remembered me. I should have stopped texting him then, but a part of me wanted to talk to him, so that's how it started." We kept texting back and forth each day. Alex informed me about lots of things. It was all through texts, but I know we shared a lot of feelings too. He informed me about how his study in arts went well. He asked me things about what I was doing and about my career. I thought about whether I should lie at first, but I couldn't because I love my husband. I told Alex that I was married and he didn't reply. I was thinking maybe it was a bad idea, but my mind changed when he texted me back. He told me it was great that I was married and he hoped I was happy. It didn't sound sincere to me when I read it, but I left it at that. It's been a week since we were chatting and everything was going great. He asked me where I was staying now because he wanted to come visit. I was against it, but it didn't seem bad since it was just an old friend who's also an ex. There was just one problem, and it was that Stan didn't know. I didn't know if I should tell him because it was concerning my ex, and he knew all about our past. I was looking for something to justify what I was doing. I tried telling myself that there's nothing wrong in texting an ex. Alex and I kept texting, talking about life and sharing more things. I made a mistake one day. I still didn't see the use of telling my husband about him since it was just Alex and I. I was chatting with Alex one day, and Stan asked me why I was always on the phone. He knew I didn't text much, so it looked weird to him. I don't know why I lied and told him it was nobody. I left my phone for a second to go to take out the trash, and when I came back, I saw my phone in his hand. I became angry, and I don't know why. I think one of the reasons is because I was wondering why my phone was in his hand. It meant he didn't trust me. I was also angry at myself because I knew I would have to tell him the truth. He looked at me and I asked him what he was doing with my phone. He said a call came in, but he had a question for me. Who was Alex? He knew about my ex, Alex, but he wanted to confirm it was him. I asked him why he was looking at my texts, but he didn't answer me. Can you believe that? He went on with the questions, and I told him the truth about how it was my ex. He frowned and shouted, asking about why I would be texting my ex. I told him it was no big deal, and he should stop making it sound huge. He was exaggerating. I mean, it's normal to text your ex, right? I also argued with him that it wasn't me that texted him first, and he was the one. It's just a longtime friend of the past. Yet Stan kept overreacting, saying he texted for a purpose, but I don't believe that. He told me to stop texting Alex, but I don't want to. Is that bad? Imagine how much he would react if I said he wanted to visit, though I don't want Alex coming between Stan and I. I collected my phone from him and went out for a walk. Stan kept telling me to come back because we were still talking, but I didn't want this conversation to keep going. I needed to clear my head. I don't know what to do right now because I'm stuck. Should I keep texting with Alex? It's not like he said he wanted to go out with me or anything. Even if he says that one day, it wouldn't bring any harm because we were friends. Or should I not text him anymore and listen to my husband? What if he truly has a purpose like he said? My mind is all jumbled up right now, so I need advice on what to do. Please help. Comments. 1. You, Reddit user 1. What's wrong with you? I mean that in the most absurd way. Because why would you want to choose an ex over your own husband? You do love him, yes? Something tells me that you don't. It's best if you think well on it because he probably deserves someone better than you. Why did you keep it secret from him in the first page if you had nothing to hide? 2. You, Reddit user 2. You, Reddit user 1. This is a tough situation, so don't be too hard on her. She came here because she wanted advice, so stop judging her. Emily, I believe you should take time to calm down and think well about this. Your husband may be right, it's not a normal thing for an ex to text you just to greet you. He also says he wants to visit. What normal person would want to visit their married ex? You should have a deep talk with Stan and tell him all about these, especially your feelings. You two sound like you have a great and special marriage. It shouldn't ruin so easily. 3. You Reddit user 3. Why is no one talking about Alex? I'm only seeing talks about Emily and her husband. Hello, there's literally an ex here. Who's the problem? I believe Emily should contact Alex. You two have only been talking through texts, and you also don't know much about him. All you know is that he's in the city and he wants to meet you. So don't do silly things like keeping things from your husband and talk to him about it, so you two will be able to solve this issue. Talk to Alex. 4. You Reddit user 4. Something tells me that you're the problem. Women never appreciate something good in front of them. Instead, they want the good thing they had in the past. You should fix this and don't let your marriage get destroyed. Update. It's been days since I had an argument with my husband. I tried talking to him, but he said he didn't want to talk to me till I did something about Alex. I also read the comments. Wow, there were some really mean ones, but I realized you guys were right. I was the problem right now. I love Stan, and even though Alex was a past thing, I still had a little bit of feelings for him. But this was only because he suddenly wanted to come back into my life. I talked to John, my brother I talked about in the beginning, and I told him that Alex was back. He sounded furious over the phone, and I told him the things that had happened. He said Alex couldn't come back and try to pry into my life when I'm finally happy. I talked to my close friends, if you still remember them, the ones from the book club. They also gave me some good advice like you all did, and it was to communicate with my husband. I begged him to talk to me. He finally agreed, and he asked me who I made up my mind on. Was it him or Alex? I shook my head and held his hands because that was an absurd question now that I heard it. I can't believe I wanted to destroy my marriage because of someone I felt something for before. I apologized, and Lee told Stan I chose him over and over again, and everything's normal now. The only problem remaining was Alex. He kept texting me and asking when we were going to meet, but I tried my best to ignore him. You're thinking why I didn't block him, but I didn't want to come off too strong, although that probably sounds like an excuse. Alex began calling me because he noticed, but I didn't answer. The phone calls became more too. Stan went to work one day, and it was on one of my days off when Alex called in. I answered it after staring at it for a few seconds, and I heard his voice. It had been so long since I heard his voice. It sounded deeper and different than the one I'd heard. It's been 3 weeks since he texted me, and I was just hearing his voice. But this time, I didn't feel the emotion anymore. I'm happy about that because I wasn't so sure. I didn't want to be attached to my ex while being with my husband. Alex said hi over the phone, and I answered him. He said my voice has changed, and I said the same. He asked me why I didn't text him anymore, and why I was ignoring his calls, so I told him the truth. I told him Stan and I were not comfortable with it. I didn't bother going into any further details because it was none of his business. I told him not to bother calling me anymore. He protested at first, saying he didn't see anything wrong in a friend calling a friend. I told him he didn't need to see that, but he just needed to know. I did ask why he suddenly texted me one day, and he told me the truth. He said because he missed me and missed what he had. He told me he felt disappointed when I said I was married. That made me cringe in a way, because was he expecting me to wait for him and accept him once he was back? It's been 3 years since I met Stan, and meeting him changed my whole life. I feel happier with him. Anyways, like I said, I told him it didn't matter and he should stop trying. He apologized to me and the call ended. Once Stan came back, I told him everything that we discussed and what had happened. I promised him I won't ever let anything come between me and him because I love him. I'm happy I got married. We also discussed more things about us going to the doctor concerning the pregnancy, or we might just adopt if nothing works. Thanks to everyone here that gave me all of this advice and helped me save my marriage.